Do you just want to jump into Hereditary 2?
I didn't see it.
You didn't see it?
I was joking.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I saw Hereditary 2 today. Or, the other day.
Yeah?
You're like, what?
Yeah, I was really confused when you said that. I'm like, what do you mean? And I actually looked it up. I'm like, Hereditary 2. And then I looked up the movie by the same director, and I'm like, did that one already come out already?
Yeah.
We just talked about the trailer.
Yeah. Hereditary 2. They just renamed it to Pet Sematary.
Yeah.
Or Pet Hereditary. That's what they should call it. You remember when we reviewed that film, or the trailer for that film called The Boy in the Hole, and I made that statement that all these horror films nowadays are trying to be Hereditary?
I don't even remember that movie.
Yeah, we reviewed the trailer for that film, and I'm like, this looks like Hereditary.
I mean, I remember that conversation. I don't remember the movie.
This film just proves it, dude. We were talking about Hereditary, The Prodigy, Boy in the Hole, and now Pet Sematary. Dude, this needs to stop, dude. It's so similar to Hereditary. I mean, I can't get into plot details because it would spoil it, but it's crazy.
Have you seen the original?
Yes.
Okay, so does it follow that formula, kind of the same?
I'd say it follows elements of the book and the original somewhat similar. It follows like the Cliff Notes, I guess I would say.
Yeah, the Spark Notes.
The Spark Notes, right. So Pet Sematary, for those of you who don't know, is a Stephen King adaptation where there's this new family moves to a house. I mean, everyone knows the story of Pet Sematary. And there's a Pet Cemetery where if you bury things in there, it comes back to life.
Yeah, it's an Indian burial ground, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yeah. And they really explore into the backstory of it in this film. That's why I say they went full-blown Hereditary. Because remember, at the end of Hereditary, they just explain everything as like this ritualistic like crap like that.
Sure.
They do that in this film. It's not the very end, but it's very similar,
Okay.
And the other ways it's very similar to Hereditary, which, as you know, I'm not huge on Hereditary, is just the atmosphere. All right, let's get this out of the way. I do like the atmosphere in this film. It's a lot more serious. It's a lot more dark. It's a lot less cheesy than the 80s version of Pet Sematary. It takes itself much more seriously than that version. And this film actually has some decent atmosphere and scares. It's a very competent film. So let me get that out of the way first. Okay. They take it very seriously. But I feel like they take it too seriously at some parts. Like Hereditary, this film is way too grim. It's way too grim. It's super dark. There's like no levity in this film, kind of like Hereditary, which is fine if you're into that sort of thing, which a lot of people are with like Hereditary, but it's not my personal kind of horror film. You know what I'm saying? And Pet Sematary is not my personal kind of horror film. It's a very competent film, and if someone likes it, I can be like, okay, I can see why you like it. But for me personally, it's too grim. It's too dark. There's no levity in the film. No humor. I feel like you need some humor to break that tension, and there's nothing of that. Kind of like Hereditary. There's none of that. And they changed the ending of the movie to reflect how grim it is. There's no hope in this film. I'll just say that right then and there. But the performances are really good, especially from John Lithgow. He steals the show. He's amazing. The wife, I can't remember her name. She's also really amazing. Jason Clarke is the main character. He's the dad that you're following. And he does a good job with what he's given, but it's so weird that he's the character given the least. He doesn't really have a backstory. He doesn't really have motivation. He doesn't really have character to him. He's sort of like a blank slate. As a matter of fact, they give the tragic backstory to the mother. They flesh out the mother. They flesh out the neighbor, played by John Lithgow. They flesh out everybody except the main character. It's like the Bella Swan effect, or whatever the character's name was from Twilight.
Yeah.
It's like everyone else, or Pirates of the Caribbean even though they did a much better job. Like, everyone else has, more backstory and more charisma and more character than the main character. And it's like, why do you do that? You're supposed to follow this guy, but he's very kind of one note and very kind of cardboard. And that has nothing to do with Jason Clarke's performance.
Yeah.
His performance is great with what he's given. But again, it's just very dark, very grim. There's no hope in this film. There is some decent scares, but there's just some elements of it where I was like, man, first of all, this film takes a long time to get going. Like the first half of this film.
Like Hereditary.
Yeah, exactly. The first half of this film, I was kind of not bored. I wasn't bored, but I was like, something something's got to start happening. Like, when is something going to happen? And then something does happen. And if you know Pet Sematary...
Yeah, well, I mean, that's how it was in the other one, too. Like, nothing happened until it did happen.
Yeah, yeah. And if you know Pet Sematary, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
However, when that's...
Or if you've seen the trailer, because let's face it, they just kind of gave that away.
Right. Yeah, that's true, because it's so well known what happens.
Yeah.
It's kind of weird that I'm not spoiling it, but... Because it's so obvious what happens, but when that inciting incident does happen... That's like some Final Destination shit, dude. I kind of laughed at that part. Like, I was like, really? I'm like, okay. You know, like, there's like a chain of events that happens that causes someone to die, and I'm like, that was some like Final Destination shit. But it's meant to be taken very seriously and stuff. And I'm like, okay.
Oh boy.
Yeah. There is some... Oh, and there's also... This is kind of a side note. There's a scene in here, dude, that makes me it made me cringe. I actually yelled in the theater. I was like, oh!
Really?
Yeah, and if you're... Ooh, it's bad. I won't spoil it for you, but there is a very gruesome scene in here. I was like, oh, God, that's... Ugh.
Is it kind of like body horror?
Yes. There's a body horror moment in here where you're just like, ooh! Ooh!
Yeah.
And
that's more effective to me than, like, anything else. Like, I don't know what it is. Like, jump scares don't get me, but, like, those, like... Ooh.
Yeah, I mean, they make you cringe. They make you cringe, but you can't make a whole movie out of that, though.
No, you can't.
Saw and Hostel, you know.
Unless you're Cronenberg.
That's true. Well, Cronenberg actually has character and depth.
Yeah,
You take Saw and Hostel, it's just nothing but that, and you're like, oh, this is garbage.
Yeah.
You know? So overall, I guess this was a lot shorter of a review than I thought it was going to be. Yeah, I gave it the exact same rating as Hereditary, 3 out of 5. I can see why people might like it, but for me personally, it's not my kind of horror film.
That's fair. Mm-hmm. That's fair. And, like, you know, we've talked about, like, outside of here, I don't think we've ever talked about it on the podcast, about, like, biases when it comes to movies. Like, that's perfectly acceptable. Mm-hmm. Like, if you don't like it for a certain reason and you realize that it's, like, it's just not for me, like, that's perfectly acceptable, because that's the reason why there's more than one critic. If there was one critic to just say, this is what's good, this is what's bad, we would be out of a job.
That's true.
We would not even be doing this podcast.
That's very true.
And that's, like, the thing, is you got to find somebody that you really click with.
Yeah, and you also have to kind of be careful about how you say it, because there's a lot of people who are like, Star Wars is garbage, and here's why. And it's like, no.
Is garbage. It should be, I think,
or in my opinion,
is garbage.
Star Wars is garbage. Or it's like, Star Wars is not for me, is a better way to put it.
That's like the optimal way, but like we can't expect
we can't expect that from people.
To be civil. Like,
we can't expect people to be civil. So it's like, that's why I like to do with my criticisms is I like to acknowledge the good in pretty much any film. With this film, though, it's like, it's just not for me personally. But I can see why other people would like it.
Okay.
And I can definitely see why it might be their cup of tea. Same thing with Hereditary, if it's your cup of tea. But for me, I was not the biggest fan of Hereditary, and I'm not the biggest fan of this film. And I'm not a fan of this new trend we're on, where every horror film is trying to be Hereditary now. And this movie, I was kind of like, I used to always say it, and I said it to you before, I've said it on the podcast, but there was always a part of me that's like, maybe I'm thinking too deep into that. But after seeing this film, I'm like, oh yeah, okay. This is very obvious that Hereditary inspired everything about this film, or like a lot of this film, you know?
Interesting.
Yes. And again, it could be a byproduct of the adaptation, but I think it's a byproduct of Hereditary, 100%.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, 3 out of 5 for me.